Welcome to Food for Thought. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau from Compassionate Cooks. I founded Compassionate Cooks to empower people to make informed food choices and to debunk myths about vegetarianism and animal rights. I do this through cooking classes, an online cookbook, lectures and workshops, articles and essays, this podcast, and a cooking DVD, among other things. You can learn more about who we are and what we do by visiting our website, compassionatecooks.com. Thank you to all of you who responded to my request for sponsorship. I know I've said this before, but this podcast takes many hours to produce because I really care about creating quality content for all of you listeners. So if you listen regularly, and I know some of you have listened to some episodes again and again, please consider becoming a sponsor. You can decide the level. You can contribute $5 a month or make a one-time contribution, which comes with some benefits I've created. You can visit compassionatecooks.com and click on the button at the bottom of the homepage that says Support Podcasts. Thank you, Mary Bonnet, the sponsor of today's podcast, for helping to plant the seeds that others may one day reap. I'm very grateful for your support. Your emails continue to inspire and motivate me, and I'd like to share one I received a couple weeks ago from Erica. She writes, I'm a student from Lithuania, and I'm so happy to have discovered your podcast. After listening to them, I made a very important decision to be vegetarian, and I do my best to be vegan. You've totally opened my eyes. Thank you for your wonderful podcasts and all the great things that you do. I believe that you're one of those people who can change the world. You're changing mine. Well, Erica, you've changed mine, and I believe all of us are here to change the world. All of us have the power and the capacity to do that, and one of the things that's so powerful about this issue is that you don't have to become an activist to make a difference in the world. You just have to, realize that some of the things we do in our everyday activities contribute to suffering, and if we abstain from those activities, then we're making a huge difference. So going vegetarian or vegan, they're huge steps to making a difference. So thank you for what you're doing, and thanks to all of you who give me hope. And if any of you feel despair and overwhelmed by the state of affairs, this email alone should give you hope. There is indeed hope out there, and I hear it from all of you every day. So I'm very grateful. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so by sending it to podcast@compassionatecooks.com. And keep those comments on iTunes coming. I really enjoy reading them. Your comments really encourage other people to listen to the podcast, so thank you. Today I thought it would be fun to address a variety of comments about vegetarianism I've heard over the years, and you may hear yourself in one or two of them. I know I've said my share of thoughtless remarks before I started giving all of this very serious thought. If you're already vegetarian, some of these may be familiar to you because once you're vegetarian, and particularly vegan, you are bombarded with the same responses over and over and over again. It just comes with the package, so I'm warning you, but it's worth it. One of the things I find most charming about humans is that as individuals, we think we're pretty unique. We think we have pretty unique contributions to make, and we do have unique contributions to make. But when it comes to vegetarianism, I find that our responses to it are not very unique at all. That is to say, once you out yourself as a vegan, I'll admit it takes patience to cope with the responses you get, because it seems like there's this pool of responses from which people draw, and it's like they choose only the same 10 responses over and over again and just recycle them in the world. Because once you're vegan, you hear them over and over again. So, when someone says something like, where do you get your protein? And this may be the 50th time or the 100th time you've heard this. I know some people don't want to answer. They don't want to talk about it. They're sick of answering this question. They've heard it a million times. They feel like the information is out there and this person can go find out for themselves. And so they don't want to answer. And personally, I do think it's important that we respond to every question we get with grace and with truth, even to a response we've heard a million times, because that may be the first time that person's asking that question. And the fact that they're even asking a question means that they want to engage in a dialogue about this issue, which is often not talked about. So I think it's really important that we really take the opportunity. This may be the only time they've met a vegan. This may be the last time they meet a vegan, and if we scare them off in terms of answering without graciousness, then they may never ask again. And look, face it, if you are the vegan they come to, you are representing all vegans. I wish it wasn't like that, but it is true. And so they may write off veganism altogether if they find that you're, just not interested in talking about it. But that's something to say, too, is that sometimes the responses to vegetarianism aren't genuine. They might be hostile, they might be provocative, and they might just be saying something just to hear themselves talk. So I think it's important to distinguish when you have those kinds of responses and when you have a genuine question or someone seeking a genuine answer. And sometimes people are just being playful, and I just ask, are you serious about that question? Because I can't tell if you're really serious or not. And just kind of feel them out and have a conversation. And keeping a sense of humor is really vital to developing an authentic rapport with people. So anyway, I'll read a couple of common responses that I get and then offer my perspective. As a vegan, you almost have to resign yourself to being the minister to people's thoughts. And what I mean by this is that you become people's confessor with a capital C, in that you're expected to listen to what are essentially people's confessions about eating animals. And I think the use of minister is a good one, because we really do minister to attend to people's thoughts and feelings about who they eat. So whenever I tell people I'm vegan, probably the most common response I hear from people is, "Oh, I don't eat a lot of meat," or "I don't eat that much meat, except for some chickens and fish." And I actually find this very funny and interesting at the same time for a few reasons. I find it funny because it's the same exact response I get when I tell people that I don't have TV. The first thing they say is, "Oh, I don't watch that much TV." Well, there's a couple shows I really like, just that show and that show, but other than that, I really don't watch TV. It's the same. Everyone says the same thing. I think it's so funny. But just to clarify, I do have a physical television screen. Okay, next to animal rights and literature, film is a primary passion of mine. So I have a television just to watch DVDs, but I don't, have access to cable or television shows. And when people hear that, it's really cute because they go, "Oh, you can just get rabbit ears and just put and I said, "No, I don't want rabbit ears." And they say, No, you can just get them. And then they just, you can get oh, you don't want, right. I don't want it. It's very cute because everybody kind of says the same thing. So a little parallel there. But anyway, so that's what I find funny about that response. I find it interesting because I really wonder what people mean when they say they don't eat that much meat. Relative to what? Because in my mind, eating meat and dairy every day, even aside from my ethical issues with these products, is a lot. People are eating meat and dairy and eggs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks. And so what does not that much meat really mean? To what are you comparing your consumption? How much you could eat? How much they ate 100 years ago? How much you're entitled to eat? I don't know. So I think that's an interesting comment because I really don't know what it means. When people say they eat meat in moderation, relative to what? I don't know what that means. I don't think people are very good at determining what moderation is. I also find it interesting because I find that non-vegetarians are interested in aligning themselves with vegetarianism. It's why they want you to know what their habits are. It's why they say, "Oh, I'm vegetarian too. Well, I eat fish and chicken, but I'm vegetarian." I mean, they want to identify as a vegetarian. And I also think it's interesting because the fact that everyone says they don't eat a lot of meat, well, 10 billion animals are killed every year. 45 billion animals are killed if you include sea animals, and we should include sea animals. So somebody's eating the meat. Everybody says they don't eat that much meat, but somebody's eating it because 10 billion land animals and 45 billion animals altogether are killed. So I think that's really interesting. It's like the people who say, "Oh, I eat only humane meat or free-range eggs or organic cow's milk." And, no, they don't. There are very few people who actually eat only these products, those labeled humane, aside from all of the issues and the marketing ploys along with humane. There are very few people who actually make an effort to eat only those products. I know people who have made the attempt and wound up becoming vegetarian because it was a lot easier to just not eat the stuff than try to find restaurants and eating at people's houses. And, it just was a lot easier to eat vegetarian. And I also know people who say they don't eat any animal product that isn't labeled humane who then go off and do. At lunchtime they go to a Chinese restaurant or a Mexican restaurant and they order whatever's on the menu, whatever meat's on the menu, not thinking twice about where it came from. So I think it's interesting because we want to hold a perception of ourselves more than we're actually willing to take the actions necessary to reflect that perception. That is to say, perceiving ourselves as compassionate, thoughtful consumers is a lot easier than putting our principles into action. Related to this response is one that sounds something like, oh, I could be vegetarian. I could easily give up chicken and pork and beef, but I could never give up fill in the blank. And the blank is usually cheese, right? And I'm always struck by that because I don't know what they're waiting for. They may be as surprised by my answer as I am by their statement, because I usually say, so give up everything else except the cheese or whatever it is. I mean, at least it's a step. And they usually say, oh, I never thought about it like that. I think some people think that if they can't go all the way, they don't make any effort at all. But I always say, don't do nothing because you can't do everything. Do something, anything, right? Okay. Another comment I hear that I think is ironic usually comes from non-vegetarians who are over 60, and 60 is so young these days, but this is when people say they start to see their friends have heart attacks and strokes, even though we're seeing this in people in their 30s and 40s. Around 60 is when you start to hear people say that they're declining in health. And this is what I often hear them say, hey, look, we eat well. We eat everything in moderation. We're in our late 60s. We're on some medication, but we're healthier than many of our friends who were in the hospital, who've had strokes, who've had heart surgery, who've got diabetes now. Better than them. We're feeling pretty good compared to them. And the reason I think it's ironic, kind of funny, is because if you compare yourself to sick people, you're going to come out looking pretty darn good. So we might want to compare ourselves to healthy people and maybe reevaluate our health status. You know what I mean? I just think it's kind of funny. Let's see. Something else I hear people say in a somewhat defensive ways. Look, I've been going to my doctor for 30 years, and he's never told me any of this stuff about the positive effects of a plant-based diet, the negative effects of a meat and dairy-based diet. I trust my doctor, and he's never told me any of these things. And this usually goes a step further when you find out that over the last 30 years, while they've been seeing this doctor, they've been treated for high blood pressure, gastrointestinal problems, heartburn, they got high cholesterol, they have gout. And the question I have for these people who are so resistant to relying on someone else other than their doctor for medical advice is, so you've been going to your doctor for 30 years and you've got high blood pressure and high cholesterol and gout and got some intestinal problems. How's it working for you? Because I don't think that's the way it's supposed to work. Our doctor isn't supposed to be a place where we go to get sicker. We want to go to our doctor to get well. And so if I have someone that I'm relying on for medical advice for 30 years and I keep getting sicker, again, I might want to reevaluate that doctor, you know? So I just might want to rethink who we're going to for advice. I just think that's a little funny. Let's see. And finally, sometimes you hear people say something like, look, my grandfather grew up eating meat every day. He smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He never exercised, and he lived till he was 95 years old. And the subtext of this, obviously, is, so clearly there's no connection between diet and lifestyle and life expectancy. Look, there are always exceptions to the rule. I don't need to go through all the benefits of a plant-based diet. Okay, I'll just go through one point about this. The American Dietetic Association of America and Canada, their position paper on vegetarianism says this, and I quote, vegetarian diets offer a number of nutritional benefits, including lower levels of saturated fat, cholesterol, and animal protein, as well as higher levels of carbohydrates, fiber, magnesium, potassium, folate, and antioxidants such as vitamins C and E and phytochemicals. Vegetarians have been reported to have lower body mass indices than non-vegetarians, as well as lower rates of death from ischemic heart disease. Vegetarians also show lower blood cholesterol levels, lower blood pressure, and lower rates of hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and prostate and colon cancer. So that's kind of the norm. And there's going to be exceptions to the norm all the time, all right? And the point that I want to make about that response is that there's a lot to be said for quality of life. We're living to ripe old ages now, not simply because we're evolving to cope with our destructive lifestyles, and they are destructive, but because artificial interventions are keeping us alive longer. Frankly, I don't think we're better off having stents put in our chests, right? And taking pills every day and having our chests cut open and having arteries from our legs grafted to our coronary arteries and eating until we're so overweight that we have our stomachs stapled. I mean, I don't think that's the way we're supposed to live. That's not optimum. Just because we're living long doesn't mean we're living well. So that's all I got. I don't want these to get too long. I know we've been getting longer as we've been going along. Sorry about that. But don't worry, there are plenty more where these came from, and you can certainly send me the comments you hear from people because I know we all have funny stories to tell. We should all just get together sometime and just tell the stories that we hear. And have a sense of humor if you're a non-vegetarian and you say these things too. I'm sure you've heard yourself in some of the things I said. It's okay. We've all said them before. So we'll cover more another time. Until then, be well and speak the truth and create a safe space for others to speak their truth. This is Colleen from Compassionate Cooks. Thanks for listening.